My name's Sabrina Ramonov, and in this video, I'm excited to test drive Andrew Ng's new GitHub repo called Translation Agent. He announced it on Twitter and LinkedIn yesterday, and it's basically an agent workflow to translate text from one language to another using the design pattern of reflection. And if you're not super familiar with agents, the design pattern of reflection, all that means is allowing your agent to pause, think about the work it's done so far, and think about ways to improve it. So applied to language translation, how this works, and you'll see it in the code base when we dive in, is first the agent translates from one language to another, and then the next step is the agent is tasked with reviewing that translation and thinking about ways to improve it, providing self-feedback to improve the translation. And then the third step is incorporating that feedback to improve the translation and produce a higher quality final output. So here's the GitHub repo, translation-agents. And one of the cool things about using an LLM for the translation is that it's highly customizable. So you'll see in the code base, you can modify things like the language translation's formality, like should it be informal or informal. You can specify regional dialects. For example, Andrew lays out here Spanish spoken in Latin America is different, obviously, from Spanish spoken in Spain. And here's instructions for getting started. It's pretty simple: pip install, clone it, poetry install, and shell. And then this is a simple script just to get started. Okay. So here I have the code base. So what we're going to do first is just try running his example. Okay, example_scripts. And this is the source text. So last week I spoke about AI and regulation, blah, 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 based on my conversations with legislators, so on. So what we're doing here is translating the English text to Spanish, and then we indicated Mexico as the country to account for regional variations. All right, and here's the full translation. I don't speak Spanish, so I can't speak to the quality of this translation, but I just wanted to show kind of how easy it is to install this open source code base and just get it running. So Andrew already included an example script with example text, and really all you have to do is set up your environment variable for OpenAI API, which you can see up here. Just set the environment variable for OpenAI_API_key. All right, so since I don't actually speak another language, I only speak English, what I wanted to do is actually test this agent workflow for language translation and what I call its stability under inverse. All that means is we're going to translate some text, let's say from English to Spanish, and then we're going to translate it back from Spanish to English, and then understand whether the meaning of the original text was retained throughout the translation. Obviously, in a perfect ideal system, translating back and forth infinite times would not alter the meaning of the text. So let's see what happens. So here's the code base I wrote. I just called it inverse in the sense that we're translating from one language to another, and then we're doing the inverse transformation, translating back to the original language. So our source language will be English, our target language will be Spanish, and for now I just did a really simple source text. Large language models are pretty cool. And then the countries will be Mexico and US. And this is the number of iterations, so how many times we want to go back and forth. And this is really the code base. So it toggles between Mexico and US, and it goes back and forth, translating from English to Spanish, from Spanish to English. So this is where it just reverses it. Okay. So first let's try it for just 3 iterations. So here I'm going to run Python inverse.py. And this is, again, going from English to Spanish, back to English. And what we want to look at is whether the meaning of the text meaningfully changed. Ideally, we don't want it to change. We actually want to preserve the meaning. It's okay if like little words here and there change, but we want to preserve the primary meaning of the text. So you can see here, this is our logging message, iteration 1 out of 3, English to Spanish, where we indicate for Spanish, the country is Mexico. This is the output. Again, I don't speak Spanish, so what I want to know is translating that back to English, does it retain meaning? So here in the second iteration, from Spanish back to English, the output is, man, those big AI language models are awesome. So what's interesting here, so if you look at the original text, large language models are pretty cool. Like we know in tech, large language models refers to something specific. Large is not just an adjective. Large language models refers to language models that have been trained on billions and billions of parameters. And so when the translation workflow goes back from Spanish to English and outputs, man, those big AI language models are awesome. I would actually say that the meaning of the text has been altered because it's not referring to large language models the way that like we would think about it or we would talk about it in English. Surprised, actually, that this happened. Like I kind of expected this mistranslation to happen after more iterations. So I'm surprised it happened on the first translation back to the original source language. But let's take a look real quick at Andrew's open source code base to see what's actually going on under the hood. There are really 3 steps to this agent workflow. There's the initial translation from the source language to the target language, and then there's the reflection step where we prompt the LLM or agent to reflect upon the translation with the background of an expert linguist specializing in, let's say, like a regional language, and then ask it for feedback to further improve the translation. And then the third step is incorporating that feedback into the final translation, which is hopefully higher quality. So just to point out like where in the code base this is happening. So here, one chunk initial translation. This is the system message. You are an expert linguist specializing in translation. And then this is the prompt. So this is a translation. Please provide the translation for this text. Do not provide any explanations or text apart from the translation. That's step 1. And then step 2 is using the design pattern of reflection. The way to think about reflection is typically people interact with LLMs today and they just type a prompt and hope that ChatGPT, or whatever LLM gets it right from beginning to end. Reflection is introducing like a pause, like a break for the LLM to be able to look at its work so far and go back and think about how to make that work better, how to revise it, how to edit it to improve the quality. And so that's all that reflection is. It would be similar to like if you were writing a code base and you took a break and you thought about it while in the bathroom or on a walk, and then you came back and you're like, oh yeah, I should like improve all of these things in my code. That's all that reflection is for agents. So here is how it works. This is the system message. You're an expert linguist specializing in translation. You'll be provided with a source text and your goal is to improve it. And then here's the reflection prompt. There's an if statement. So if you supplied a country, then the reflection prompt says that the style and tone of translation should match the style of the target language that's actually spoken in the country. If you didn't provide a country, that's down here, then it just doesn't include that stuff about like the colloquial regional style and tone of the translation. And then here, the reflection prompt continues. So when writing suggestions, pay attention to possible ways to improve it. So accuracy, fluency, and style and terminology, and then write a list of specific helpful suggestions to improve it. Each suggestion should address one specific part of the translation. And step 3 here is to prompt the agent to use the reflection or feedback from the previous step to finally improve the translation. So the system message again is you are an expert linguist, so-and-so, and the prompt is your task is to read, then edit the translation, taking into account the expert feedback from step 2. Okay, so now what I want to do is actually increase the number of iterations, just because I'm curious, like, will it make it back to the original meaning of the text, which is that large language models are awesome. Like I said, I was pretty surprised that it kind of lost the meaning already from the first inverse. I expected it to take more iterations than that to lose the meaning of the original text. Kept most of it, but by removing the word large from large language models, it lost what it's supposed to be referring to. And this is potentially fixed, by the way, by introducing maybe like a glossary or something where like a technical glossary where large language models is an entity that is known and defined. So I'm not saying this isn't insurmountable, but I'm just kind of curious if we translate back and forth many times, Like, what does that end output look like? How far has it diverged from the original text and meaning of the original text? Okay, so here we finished 10 iterations. So an iteration is one translation. So 2 iterations is translating once and then going back. So it translated back five times. Okay, and then the final translation to English is language models are incredibly powerful and truly amazing. And then remember what we started with. Large language models are pretty cool. Large So it kept, I guess, 3 of the words, language models are, but it dropped large language models again, which makes sense. I mean, it dropped it way earlier. It dropped it actually on the first inverse. It replaced large with powerful, which again, it completely changes the meaning because in tech, we know that large language models refer to something specific. And it's interesting, this concept of powerful, because in the original source text I say pretty cool, and I'm wondering if it's like, I'm just guessing, but if it's like interpreting it or combining like the concept of large and cool into the concept of powerful, and then what is interesting is this powerful actually continues throughout all of the transformations, like powerful here, incredibly powerful, unbelievably powerful, incredibly powerful, and incredibly powerful. And so the other interesting thing, now that I'm looking at this, I should have made this like a little easier to read, but it does seem to kind of converge, right? Like, okay, it loses the meaning of large language models on the first inverse. But then after that, I mean, these translations, let me just highlight it here, are pretty consistent. So like, it actually converged to this translation. Like, I'd be interested in running it 20 more times and seeing if it converges to this as well. Incredibly powerful or awesome. Yeah, and if we want to be stricter, we would say, okay, this one's like almost there, but like these 3, except for this one word, just and truly, these are basically identical. And so, really interesting. So again, the 2 things that I'm kind of looking at are, is the original meaning of the text preserved? In this case, the answer was no, because in the first transformation, kind of lost the concept of a large language model. And then I really think it combined the concept of large and cool into the concept of powerful. I think, though, that can be fixed with a glossary, but still a really interesting example. And then the second thing I'm looking at is whether like the translations converge. These translations are pretty identical. And so, yeah, really interesting that it converged. What I'm going to do now is just run it for like, let's just double it to like 20 iterations and see if it really is converging or if it's going to like morph again into something else. Okay, so now it finished the 20, and in the first transformation, it also lost the concept of large language models, and now it says big AI language models are super cool. The next translation, advanced, true, okay, big. Okay, so now instead of the word powerful coming up again, it's the word advanced. So now it's truly incredible how advanced they are. It's really impressive how advanced. Impressive how incredibly advanced the artificial intelligence. It's impressive to see how much AI language models have advanced. Instead of have advanced, it says have come, which is like a synonym for advanced. And then it keeps changing it to have come. So we went from large language models are pretty cool to it's really impressive to see how far AI language models have come. So it's interesting. So it did lose the concept of large language models. But again, you can fix this by introducing like a glossary or dictionary in the prompt. You don't want to have to do that like all the time, which is why I'm running this experiment. I'm just wondering, like, without those hints, how well will it do? And it's really interesting here. Like, I would say the meaning of this is a bit different from the original text. So the initial text was large language models are pretty cool, and this translation after after 20 is it's really impressive to see how far AI language models have come. And I would say like the meaning of these two sentences are not the same. Like they're actually conveying different ideas. One is about the progress of language models. The other one is more of a static observation. Like at this point in time, I think large language models are pretty cool. And I'm wondering like what will happen if we expose it to like a much longer text. So let's try that next. So I just went on Twitter and let's see how well it does. Okay. All right. I don't want to run it for 20 iterations. Let's just try like, it's going to be a lot of text. So let's just try like 6, make it an even number. So this will transform it back to the original language 3 times. All right, the translation is done. That took a while. But yeah, let's put it together side by side to see what happened. Okay, so here's the Spanish translation. And then here's the first translation back to English. Output, a great day is simple. Okay, it's identical. You wake up surrounded by loved ones, relaxed, playful, grateful for these. That's really good, yeah. You disconnect from your phone, go for a long walk, connect with thoughts you didn't know you had. Pretty much the same as the original post. You jot down your ideas, one hunch, sparking the next. I like that. You connect more dots, clarifying what you want from life. That's great. You continue to invest in your personal growth, go to the gym, read a book, write your own book, eat well, occasionally fast for self-discipline or health. I didn't even notice that in the original post. Unlearn parts of yourself and relearn others. You reconnect without getting distracted, do your work, reevaluate long-term investments, stay alert to opportunities that match your aspirations. It's interesting. So the original was stay on the lookout for opportunities that are coherent with who you want to become. And I would say this, even though it looks different, I would say this like totally captures the meaning of this text. Look out for opportunities that match like who you want to become, your aspirations. You take a shower. Oh, hang on, I missed this one. You have a deep conversation with a friend, deepen your bonds, make a conscious effort to be kind and helpful. Yeah, that's great. Okay, and then the last thing, you take a shower, go to bed, you sleep well knowing you did well. You have a few dreams that remind you of how little you understand reality. You're filled with excitement thinking about all you can achieve in the future, provided you remain disciplined, optimistic, and patient. So I think this first inverse transformation was really great. Like it retained every single part of the original post. There's nothing here that I would say it lost the meaning of or twisted. Okay, so this is the second transformation back to English. So again, we're going back and forth, English, Spanish, and we're trying to see how lossy each transformation is. So yeah, you put your phone aside, take a look, scribble instead of jot down, scribble down. Which triggers the next. Okay, you keep fueling your personal growth, which corresponds to keep investing in yourself. Hit the gym, dive into a book, incorporating occasional fasting, shed old habits. I like that. Unlearn parts of yourself, relearn others. Yeah, you reconnect with the world. So align with your aspirations. So this was interestingly consistent with the previous inverse transformation, even though it's worded quite differently from the original source text. I think that it retains the meaning. Maybe you have a different opinion about that, but I think it does a really good job retaining the meaning. Okay, that's great. Remind you of your limited control of reality. Actually, I would say that introducing the word control here changes the meaning a little bit. Like this is more about how little we understand the true nature of reality. And this one talking about control, I do feel like it changes the meaning a little bit. You feel inspired about if you stay Yep. So I think overall, yeah, this second inverse transformation did a really good job retaining the key points. I would say this arguably is the only phrase where I feel like it introduced or translated a term in such a way that it changed the original meaning a little bit. But let's go ahead and look at the last one as well. So, great day, simple, comforting presence of your loved one. So I would say this, it changes the meaning from plural to singular. Like you wake up around people you love, which could be multiple people, your spouse, if you have kids, parents nearby, whatever. When I read this, I think just of spouse. And so I do feel like this third inverse transformation did change the meaning here. Set your phone article. Connect your ideas down. It's interesting. It introduced in a notebook. It seems unnecessary, but yeah, it changed. Okay. It does a really good job with all these so far. You keep nurturing your personal. Channel your thoughts to write your own book. Yeah. Leave behind old habits. Okay. You reconnect with the world without getting. You acted well. Yeah, again, it introduced that word control in the second inverse transformation, and we see it here as well. Sure. Yeah, I would say I don't know, 95% of it, really the meaning was retained. My only two tidbits are this word control that was introduced in the previous inverse transformation, and then here where it changed it from plural to singular, which for me changed the kind of picture in my head. But aside from that, everything else was impressively spot on. And this is translating back and forth. So we did 6 iterations. So it's translated back to English 3 times in total. And I thought it did a really great job retaining the vast majority of the insights in this long text. I'm going to switch everything back to what we had before. Large language models are pretty cool. What I want to do is see if I can just change the system message for the initial translation and see if that helps. So you are an expert linguist. Yeah, let's maybe put it here. Any references to technical terms. I have no idea if that's going to work. But let's go ahead and try it out. Let's just do 6. So it's faster. Because remember, it lost the meaning of large language models immediately, the first inverse transformation. And so what I'm trying to do is get it to preserve the term large language models because it is a concept that's known, but I don't want to have to introduce a separate glossary or dictionary into the prompt in order for the agent to be able to do that. I'm just wondering if I tell it to preserve any references to technical terms, is that sufficient prompting for the agent to, first look if there are any technical terms in the original language and then, preserve them. The other issue is perhaps the technical terms are lost by the third translation step. So maybe I'll also try including it in the third prompt. Yeah, no, see, already in the first transformation, it lost it. It became powerful again. So what I want to do though is try copying this. Let's put it in the third prompt as well. Blah, blah. Oh, I haven't set up this keyboard. Okay. Yeah, now adding it into the third prompt did not help. I'm pretty sure if I tell it to preserve any references to technical terms such as large language models, dictionary, I was going to say large language models. Okay. Okay, I mean, yeah, I mean, as I suspected, like explicitly including a dictionary in the prompt helped preserve the meaning we wanted. So here, again, what I did is preserve any references to technical terms in this dictionary. Just created an array and then added large language models. Let's see though if it consistently preserves that across all trends. Yeah, so large language models. Okay. So we've now done the inverse transformation twice. And I would say this output is pretty close. I mean, I think this really does capture the initial input, which was, hey, large language models are pretty cool. And then large language models are truly impressive. Yeah, so here in the third inverse transformation, then we lost large language models. And you can see in the Spanish is also different. So here, this was the Spanish that, actually I don't know Spanish, so I'm not sure what I'm pointing at, but this translation is what led to large language models, which looks pretty similar to this translation as well, large language models. Yeah, here we lost large language models in the third inverse transformation, unfortunately. But yeah, so far this library is super fun to play around with. If you look at the GitHub repo and just scrolling down, Andrew Ng and his co-creators mentioned a number of ideas for improving the open source code base. It's currently using GPT-4 Turbo right now. He mentions, building a glossary so that certain terms that are significant, like large language models, are translated consistently. Aside from technology, you can also imagine a lot of like specialized terminology depending on your industry or business. Given a glossary, what's the best way to include it? Obviously, kind of what I did, hard coding it like this would not be great if you have, millions of terms potentially and multiple glossaries. Valuations, yeah, that's right. I just tested it on Spanish. It would be really interesting to test it as well on any other language. So here, let's do that real quick, actually. So, I'm trying to learn a little bit of Russian at the moment. Okay, let's try that. I'm still including the dictionary on this run. Okay, the Russian run is done. We can see that's interesting. Yeah, the first inverse translation is large scale language models. Close, but not quite. But then the second and third have large language models again. And then the fourth and fifth translated to advanced language models. So just from my brief time playing around with this repo and translating text back and forth across languages, I do think the incorporation of glossaries will be a really meaningful problem to solve and help with a lot of these issues around technical terms or industry specific terms or niche specific terms. Because remember when we did the translation with the longer text, which didn't really include any like technical terms or industry specific jargon, it was really awesome. Like it really captured the essence of almost every phrase. I only had, a little nitpicks here and there, such as changing from plural to singular, which kind of changes the visual in my head. And then like introducing a little word like control instead of understanding, in my opinion, changed the meaning just a little bit. And so, yeah, we can see it works like really incredibly well, like very impressively well, if the text does not contain technical or industry specific terminology and things like that. But we can see even with like a super simple sentence, large language models are pretty cool. That technical terminology, it's like really difficult to preserve that. And what is the best way to incorporate a dictionary or glossary in the prompt? So like my hacky approach is I just put it in the first and third steps of this agent workflow. But even then, after a couple iterations of the inverse transformation, we lose it again. It's just similar to what we saw in Spanish. Yeah, definitely super fun repo to play around with. I recommend you play around with it as well. Super excited to see where it goes. And if you're interested, this is the list from Andrew Ng in terms of ideas for extending and improving this open source code base. All right, thanks for watching. I'm Sabrina Ramonov. If you like this video, hit like, subscribe. I do a lot of videos where I'm just playing around with generative AI tools and showing you how to use them.